Jaki jest punkt wyjścia dla innowacyjnych produktów i usług? Potrzeba, przeczucie, idea i ludzie, którzy powiedzą, to możliwe, zróbmy to.
Ale entuzjazm to nie wszystko. Potrzebujesz maszyn i narzędzi.
Potrzebujesz materiałów i przestrzeni do próbowania.
Przestrzeni do zmieniania i próbowania na nowo.
Potrzebujesz w każdym punkcie skończonego produktu lub usługi.
I miejsca, by je skończyć.
A potem
Pokazać ludziom, przetestować i poprawić.
aż trafisz w punkt.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to LAB150 Discovery Program. My name is Alain. I'm a business partner of LAB150, and I will be moderating the session of today. Moderating means that I will not be speaking, I will be questioning, and the session of today is dealing with business models and to see how we can innovate through business models. And therefore, we wanted to have an expert, a friend from LAB150, a friend from Poznan, who was already there some years ago before the pandemic. And we are glad and honored that he's back today. His name is Patrick van der Pijl. For people that knows Patrick through his books, The Business Model Shift, but also other books that he wrote, he's a fantastic expert in business model innovation, because often what we think is to innovate, we need to create a new product or a new service. But sometimes just through the business model, you can also innovate and reinvent maybe your company, your product or your service. That's his big expertise. He created a few years ago, or many years ago, he created a company called Business Model Inc. that is operating in US, in Europe, but also in Asia. And he's helping big corporates or smaller organizations, but also often big corporates, to reinvent themselves, to come up with new strategies, to revisit their business models, and through that, to help them to survive in the world of tomorrow, where all of us are very much challenged. He will be speaking for us during half an hour. He prepared some slides that he will lead us through. And after that, we are going to just have a lively chat, a discussion between Patrick and me, but also, we hope, with the audience. So don't forget or make sure that if you have a question, throw it in the chat, and the team from LAB150 will pass me the questions, and I will be challenging Patrick with your questions and trying to answer them. All of that should take us not more than 1 hour. So half an hour presentation, half an hour interaction. But Patrick is already here on the screen. And I would maybe, before you dive into your slides, maybe just highlight a little bit, what can the audience expect from you in the next half hour? What are the big messages that you want to pass to them? And then you can share your screen and dive into your presentation.
Yeah, so Alain, thank you very much for being here and also your warm introduction. It's very sad that we are not physically in LAB150, because when I see the video, it's really exciting what's going on. That would be like the perfect playing field for us innovators. But yeah, I thought when I look at the audience for today, I thought, like, I'm not gonna give you a course on how to design business models, but I would like to take you also into a journey of where we see business models moving today. So what are the high new things that we see that are of high interest also for big corporates, but also startups. And then in the end, to give you like a more broader view on how to look at business model design through the lens of business model portfolios. So that's what I'm going to talk about in, I think, 78 slides.
Okay, the floor is yours. You have half
Yes.
an hour, or take the time you want, and I see you back in half an hour with some questions from me, but also from the audience. So we listen to you, Patrick.
Yes. So when you my journey started 11 years ago with being the producer of this book, Business Model Generation, and that was really the first time when we saw a blend of business and design. So the blend of business and design made that we designed a beautiful visual book, but also to create tools to also demystify the process of business model innovation. And recently I put a book together on mapping all those business models, because when you do that, you see specific trends and patterns. And whether you are a startup or an entrepreneur or somebody working in a corporate organization, then you can kind of predict or understand where these shifts are going. So that's what I also would like to talk about. And this is a slide that is not of too much interest because we know that this is happening. But I think especially now in this context, it's important to understand. And we see that companies now need to question themselves, where do we add value today in the now? And this is a symbol or icon of the business model canvas. But when you look at the edge of innovation, then the question is for you as a company, how are we going to make sure that we make the shift towards a new way of value creation? So what we are doing with our teams and the clients we work with, that we always have one single question that we need to answer ourselves. And that's the question, where is value next? And if you would like to understand where value is next, that what we saw in the recent past is that there is a huge technology shift going on. And when you start to think about new business value, then we learned that you need to look at value on the crossroads of technology change. And that is actually causing you and me as a consumer that we change our behavior. So for example, if you have your Fitbit, which is new technology or recent technology, and that makes you to walk in the park more often, then you might need more running shoes or walking shoes because you need new ones because the old are gone because you walk so much. But also it starts to think about our health and then create also new concepts. So we learned that this technology shift is very important to understand. And I'm also speaker for Singularity University, and that is a university from the US that started to talk about this notion of exponential growth for many years now. And when we talked about AI or blockchain or IoT in the past, 5-6 years ago, this was still something not easy to understand because we could not imagine what these business efforts, the business results would look like, or the business benefits. But right now, it is part of our everyday life. So this technology change that has resulted in completely new concepts, and therefore you and me as a consumer are changing big time. So this is something at the crossroad of technology change, changing customer behavior. That's where these new business models pop up. And I would like to give you a lens to show you what we see in terms of new concepts, because what is important in business model innovation, you don't need to come up with these ideas yourself, right? So we say everything is already invented, but maybe not by yourself. So looking around and seeing those technology change, consumer behavior change, that's where these business models pop up. And we have experienced lately the craziest new normal ever before, because as a result of the pandemic, it was physically impossible to visit your business or business model, right? So we learned that this physical limitation started to emerge into an acceleration of the digital shift, right? So McKinsey said that the pandemic caused actually a transformation, a digital transformation that was happening 7 years faster without the pandemic. So some companies who had a little bit of a digital element inside, like a website or something, they started to experience enormous acceleration. But what also happened is that we learned that there are new ways of working, right? So we start to work from home. And then you think, yeah, we know that. But if you are a telecom company and you have designed your strategy around the rollout of 5G network, and all of a sudden there's the pandemic and we're not dealing with headquarters anymore, but we have our offices, our home offices as decentralized headquarters throughout the country, then the strategy of a telecom company is now completely different. We also see that there are new ways of living, right? I mean, in the Netherlands, there were families who ordered tons of new swimming pools because we had to stay home last summer. So therefore, new ways of living is a complete change of customer behavior. And this was a picture in Barcelona where people were released after a 2 or 3 months lockdown. And what I believe is that also people start to think right now, what if the pandemic is not going to happen through the way we, but through consumption? What would that look like? So people became also more conscious. So we see that consumer behavior has shifted considerably. And some people said even the most considerable change after we experienced the horrible events of the World War II. So important to know is that behaviors change, but the basic needs are still similar because we still need to have food. We still would like to hang out with our friends, and we need products to help us solve problems. So that has never changed. And what we learned is that there are now, because of the technology change and customer behavior change, 6 ways to add value for customers. So we see a services shift from product to services. We see that there is a shareholder shift to stakeholder. We see from analog to digital. We learned that there are pipeline models shifting to platform models, and linear growth to exponential growth, and then also linear to circular growth, circular shift. So all these shifts have in common that there is a digital element in there that is causing these different patterns. So what do I mean with a business model shift is that we are always looking not only at the business model inside, but also the shift is gearing towards more customer value that is created. And if you keep that in mind, let's look at what that would mean for specific businesses. So when I look at the digital shift, then it's not about the technology at all, what some people might think, but it's about the way it has applied technology, and also what kind of new potential business or customer value emerges. And there's one very cool example when you look at Walt Disney, is because everybody is excited about such magical experience, but it's not so magical if you're waiting in line for another 2 hours. And what is interesting is that this is a real problem to be solved, right? So the board said, we would like to change the game. And what is interesting about a digital shift, so changing the way value is perceived, that has to come from the board. So the board said, we're going to invest big time into digitalization of our theme parks. And that comes always first. So somebody said, I believe that there is more value to be gained, and this is what we are going to do. So they also started to build these Rfid chips to personalize the experience, train all these employees, and equip all the hotel rooms of the specific technology. And that actually resulted into an app that everything could actually be arranged through the app. And what makes that interesting is that the relationship you have with customers is directly, because normally you don't know, but now you know who's exactly in your park. And therefore they could also create other opportunities to make money. So here are the fast passes that they started to create. And what made it interesting is that they could control the crowd in the park. So you don't need to wait in line anymore, but you can just enjoy yourself in the park, and therefore also less waiting time, more entertainment, and more consumption in the shops. And therefore, this is the way how they created this end-to-end experience. And what does that mean for the business model? Is that we see that there are still the families with kids as a customer segment. The value proposition is the Disney experience, but with this My Magic Plus experience, they could also add personal services recommendations, and they had also a channel to offer these personalized services. And that resulted in more food and drinks, more merchandise, and more ticket sales. And when you model, they started to do new things. They needed to analyze data, to optimize operations, train their employees, use this technology, and also cooperate with accelerator programs to come up with new concepts, new ideas. And especially here, we identified that those board members are truly important. And therefore, introducing technology into a physical theme park started to create complete different value for customers. So not only physical, but now also physical and digital. And another concept is when you look at this AI technology, that also creates complete new opportunities. So this was my office in Amsterdam 2 years ago, and I realized I needed a loan from the bank. So I started to connect to my ING trusted bank advisor, and they said, okay, you don't have any debt in the company, it's no issue. We can supply you the loan. So I was afraid that I would not get the loan because I already started to hire these construction workers. But it took me 6 weeks and I still haven't heard from my bank. So I started to look elsewhere and I came across this concept called New 10. And these guys, they allow credits run by an algorithm. So what you need to do is you identify what you need to have in terms of a loan. You give them access to your bank account and they will tell you in 15 minutes if you can get the loan. So request the offer, upload information, and then you can sign the contract. So what happened, I got 500,000 euros in 15 minutes in one day, right? And the next day it was in my bank account. So I was super happy because as a result of artificial intelligence, then the bank could not help me. It took too much time, but the algorithm helped me to fulfill my entrepreneurial dreams. So again, interesting insight, a business model with AI gives customer value much easier and faster, and therefore also more willingness to pay. Another example is for AI is also AI in farming. So if you are a farmer and you need to understand at what time you need to feed your herd or give water to the crops, etc., that's already designed and run by your algorithm. And then, for example, you see that for such a company, you see that there are dairy farmers and enterprises, and they give access through the value proposition to understand how to grow the crop or grow the herd. And there is an app that helps you. So you pay a service fee, and then you as a farmer can increase the health of your herd or the number of crops that you have, and therefore generate more revenue. So you see that this digital element here is what we learn, is that technology helps us to create different value for companies, and therefore you and I as consumer or as a farmer are willing to pay more. What I would like to show you also is what I'm fascinated about is the services shift. So again, as a result of technology and customer behavior, we see that there are new concepts popping up. And this is something that might not be too new, but it's interesting to understand how these mechanics work. So it is about access and not ownership. And let's look at an example as a Dutch bike, right? So this is a Dutch bike, and this is Dirk, and he's the founder of that company. And I said, if I have a flat tire as a student, I go to the repair shop, but then it takes me 2 weeks to get there, and then they repair my bike, but then they don't take care of my tire also, but they also take care of my lights, etc. And the bill is too high, and I don't mind because my interest is to have a bike, to be able to bike. So he said, what I'm going to do is to offer bike as a service. So we don't sell the product. The value is not in the bike, but the value is in access and operating the bike. And this is what that business model looks like. So these are customer segments. They operate in cities. And then with the app, you have access to their service. And if you have a flat tire, you push the button, they swap your bike, And that's what they need to do in their whole system. So they operate a lot of bikes. It's your bike to use, but the ownership is with this company. And what is interesting in terms of value, it's not about 500 euros one time. It's about access, and people are willing to pay 20 euros a month. So I asked Dirk the question, how many customers would you consider in this group of 1,000 people? Because we were in a big stadium in the Netherlands, and only 5 people raised their hands, and I was worried. So I said, how come only few people consider your services? He said, well, we learned from customer research that people are only considering our services when their bike is broken. So keep that in mind. There's another example that I'm excited about, and somebody knocked on our door from a very big company called IKEA. And what they said is, we believe that there is a service model to furniture. So what is interesting is if you operate a building and look at LAB150, how are you gonna get all the right furniture in place? So first you need to hire an architect. They need to design what you need to have. Then you need to order. It takes a long time, and then you pay a lot of money. So what they started to offer as norm is that we want to offer furniture as a service. But remember the remark of Dirk, who is into this Swapfiets concept, the bike as a service. What Norm said, we can have a much wider customer segment range, because we are not only offering this when people need the furniture, but also for existing offices, we acquire the furniture, and then we make sure that we offer the subscription model, right? So they started to increase their customers base, not allowing people only who need furniture, but also to existing offices. And what is interesting is that guy who is running this concept, he said, I'm going to be bigger than IKEA, but please don't tell them. And again, ownership, 50,000 euros one time, including architect costs, versus 2,000 euros a month. That's the very different perception of value. Another concept, device as a service, right? So Everphone, a company from Berlin, they said, we can also do that with mobile phones. So if you are a entrepreneur and you have many people who are using their cell phone, what about security? What about replacement? What about the software? So we're gonna take away this hassle. And again, they learned from Swapfiets. So what we did as a company, they took over all our devices. They put the money on a deposit, and every month we pay the subscription model and we get a different service. So again, ownership, 1,200 euros one time, access around 48 euros a month. And what is interesting about that is how to understand the value of a services over a product. And that is really about what problems are solved on top of the product that is much more relevant. So not solving ownership of a bike, but to have access to a bike. So what you see is that in terms of services, customers expect results and not ownership. So results is your bike will be replaced, your phone will be replaced, or the furniture is in place, and not being an owner and needed to think about replacement, etc. Also, the product features are not that relevant anymore, but it's the problem that you solve, right? So Nest, they don't have the right, all these features and stuff, but the problem you solve is security, safety, that's really something else. And the other thing what people are, and especially business to businesses would like to pay for is pay for usage and not so much for the investment or for the capital expenditures. So when you look at the business model, then there is a shift in each and every building block that is very different from a traditional business model. So in terms of relationship, it's not a one-time transaction that you see with long-term relationship. They're shifting also in such concept with the bike store from a retail channel to more own channels. And with the bike, not a low-quality product, but also into a high-quality performance. And they solve a problem with a smooth experience. And in terms of activities, it's not about product marketing to push your products, but it's about fleet and asset management. And when it comes to the resources, it's not about production facilities, but much more a data and technology business, right? So amongst others, it's a complete different shift. And here, the red box, you see that when you do not sell those products anymore, but you keep the products in a system, then that's exactly where value is changing, and this model needs to be financed. Same for norm or for bike as a service. And that's sometimes difficult because companies are addicted to sales. So to make this transformation is really difficult. What I would like to show you now is, so you got some inspiration on how you can understand how business models are changing, but then how are you actually going to design a new business model? And what is important to understand before is that if you operate in a specific company, there's a distinction between execution of your business model and looking into new business model concepts. So we work for clients like IKEA or for Mars Chocolate, then we execute on the search side. So we're not that much involved with the execution side because they execute what they already know. But when it comes to innovation, it's about exploring new routes and looking at the future. And those do not go hand in hand that well. So if you look here, you see then it comes with the concept that we always, when we think about new business models, what is the problem that we try to solve here, right? So the problem of the student with the bike, is that really true? Or the problem with the entrepreneur with all these devices, is that a true entrepreneurial problem, yes or no? If so, we're going to build that validated solution, we're going to grow our market share, and then we're going to optimize, and then we're going to amplify and create that model. So this is the route of a business model process that we are implementing big time in corporate companies, but that we're also executing for startups, because that's always the same route that you have to follow in order to create value, having access to markets that are also willing to pay for your business model or your specific services. So here you see this line is also the revenue that is coming, and that will be represented like this. And this is the line. And if you look at that growth curve, it's really interesting to understand what that would look like. So if you do this for an individual project, for example, look at Amazon Go, they also followed this pattern. So Amazon Go, that really started off with envisioning a new concept, because they said the problem is that we have cashiers systems at our supermarkets, and that they said we would like to change the game. So here they started out with a prototype to build a solution that would be very different through an employee store or a mock-up store, starting to experience without supermarkets, without these cash systems. And then they, in February 2020, they started to go groceries. And in 2018, already before, they opened the first 2-3 stores. And then in 2020, there were 26 stores open or planned. So you see that they are following this pattern. And when you look, for example, at the specific steps in that process, you see that you have an ideation for ideas for value creation. You are validating the problem. You see that there is a latent value, and then you go on and on in that process. And maybe one more example. This is one of my friends, and he used to be the CIO of BMW. And he also looked into the introduction of electric cars, right? So some find this a stunning design, some they don't. And what is interesting, if you follow again their pattern, you saw that they first started to win with like visionary cars and visionary concepts, awards, and they tried to see whether this was a problem solution fit, or was this going to get and attract a big market. And first it looked like with the i3 that they started to create this market, but actually the market traction did not really happen. And if you ask me, maybe it's because of the horrible design, but this is personal. But what they learned is that they said, if we want to optimize and go to the bigger market, then we copy the existing models that we already have and change that, so the X3, and change that for an electric version, because that's exactly where we have access to the mass market, because those models are already validated, but we electrify those concepts. So these are learning journeys and design journeys for business models. So what else is interesting is that if I summarize my talk is we have to understand that everything is already invented, not by you. So following business model pattern is truly interesting and very insightful and a big source of new concepts. But this is the way you execute versus research. It's really important to have that in mind. And when you innovate new ideas or concepts, don't try to convince the naysayers or the negative people, but try to find cohorts or catalysts who can start the fire with you. And one of the key things that we learned is this is a process that should be the core business, or whether you are a startup company, a small, medium enterprise, or a corporate company, because it is about a portfolio of business models. So we also, as Business Models Inc., we do strategy jobs, and that's a different business model from innovation projects. And it's also a different business model from venturing concepts that we run. So every time the question is, what is the customer value? What is the value proposition that we offer? And how can you scale that specific business model going forward? So Alain, this was what I had in mind to talk about.
Thank you, Patrick.
Later, but
no, fantastic, and very, very inspiring, very clear. And I like, of course, your obsession, or to remind everybody that this process or this journey starts, of course, with an obsession in the beginning to understand properly the problem that we try to solve and the notion of the job to be done. And then the obsession about value. Where can I create value? And around that value, I'm diving and looking how technologies can help me to enhance the experience from the customer. But for me, that's fantastic, because you highlight, of course, everything back clearly in the mind of people. And this servicing, or this move from ownership to service, is also a huge shift that I think should open eyes and opportunities for many people. So it's fantastic from my point of view. I hope the audience as well, that they enjoyed the journey that you've taken us through for half an hour.
Alain, you know what is interesting? So we are now working with a big bank, and it's about mortgages, right? And in the Netherlands, there is this enormous increase of prices on real estate. So hardly people can afford that. So why is it not time for living as a service? Right? So take away all this hassle and stuff. And when we picked up the new iX3 as a car, then my son said, "Dad, why do you need to fill out so many forms? You only would like to use the car, right?" So I think also new generations and new contexts help us to think about those things in a very different fashion.
Absolutely. I've seen already there was one question coming from the audience that I will for sure drop on you during the conversation. But one thing that is often a question or a debate in any organization, small or big, and you were mentioning it once in your presentation, the role of the board. So it means for you that innovation is a top-down responsibility, or is it bottom-up? Who takes the lead into this? Is it the bottom, the employees and the teams, or is it the top that needs to drive it? Because that's often a debate. And what is your answer to that?
Yeah, so I see that there is a role for both. You see, for example, that ideas mostly come from crazy people inside the organization because they experience the problems that clients are facing. But for example, with the board, it has to have the support and commitment, because otherwise it's not going to happen. But that role of the board is changing throughout the process. So for example, if I would come with an idea, then the board could say, "Patrick, invest a month of time, spend 5,000 euros, and then the commitment of the board is not that big, right? It's just fun and go ahead." But at one point, if we start to see that this value is changing, and for example, take the idea of IKEA, then all of a sudden, there's complete different ballgame going on because the investments are much bigger, the risks are bigger, but also you need to have the guts as the board to make a bold decision whether this would be a new business model or a next business model to entertain. And that's what we see right now more often, that not many people in the board dare to make such decisions, right? So for example, when we were working with Mars Chocolate, and then they said, hey, we would like to add plant-based ingredients. There was a complete different mindset. So at some point, the board needed to make a decision that they would step away from the current model that they already had, with was the nice chocolate bar, et cetera, and now shift to plant-based ingredients. And many people don't feel comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, because it's true that I think the board probably needs to enable the people in the teams to invest time and energy into innovation. So that's they give the mandate to the teams to do it, but then at the end of the day, they will need to take decisions from time to time to we go for it or not. So there is an enabling role, and then there is a decision-making role, I guess. But you're right to say often ideas can come up from your people that are in close connection with the customers. They will exactly see where they can add value, and then try to come up with some new ideas around that. Because that's also another thing that I see often as a question. Corporates or companies are saying, yeah, okay, we understand we need to, and certainly with the pandemic, with everything that happened, everything is questioned again. So we need to invest more in innovation, but where do we start? We are a big company. Everything is processed and organized, and we are still working on our operations on the current products and services. But where do we start? It's a very difficult thing to imagine. Monday morning, I would like to start investing in innovation. Where do I start, Patrick?
Yeah. So what we learned over time is that you have to create, like a leadership, you have to be able to create the circumstances or space to allow these ideas to emerge, because you have to have the experience and get more insights also to value those ideas. So it starts mostly with small ideas, and then you think, well, we have no clue what this is going to end up or look like. But that will change over time. So you start small, but you have to figure out at the top also, how can you make the connection between those small ideas and the top, because in the end they're responsible for implementation. So what we see is, if we look at how this works at the moment, then it starts with people who are excited with ideas. They started to put some things together, try to find some evidence, try to talk to customers, and then it gets to in an official state. But what that official state is about is that you have to give a rally cry of the idea to say, we expect that, for example, a retail supermarket that we are working with in the Netherlands, they said, we're going to change the game in online. Well, it's already happening, but what is the estimate of revenue that we think we are going to attract with this new concept? And that is important. And sometimes people say, like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, if you don't know, how come I would know that? So if you do that, then you validate against a promise that also indicates how serious or how big this potential business would look like. And that's often what we see that people find difficult. And also, but that's the thing, if we look at a online business model for such supermarket, we now with one company said, okay, this has to generate 70 million revenue. Okay, but then we need to find so many customers for so many for the specific region, and that gives also the magnitude and the way of validation and the way of the value proposition would look like in order to come up with the solution. And we see, for example, when you look at that graph, that's also what IKEA is doing every time they put out a rally cry, validate against that. And if they see that they get there or can't get there, then they make the right decisions that are appropriate
So you start small. You try, of course, for all of these projects to see what is the full potential that could be delivered over a couple of years. So you try to foresee what it could be, but you can start with small projects. That's also where I think a place like LAB150 and other places, creative places like that, can also be very useful, because you, of course, you have your current organization where everything is processed, and you don't have always room and spaces where to experience and try and prototype and fail eventually. And that's where I think places, because that's also often a debate, shall we do it internally? Shall we do it externally? Maybe for a time you do it externally in another place like LAB150, and then later you bring it back in your operations or something like that. What do you think?
So please do it externally.
Yeah.
So what we learned is that I would rather go sit at LAB150 and figure it out, because what otherwise happens is that you need to convince all the people in the organization who've been operating in a different way, and it's never ever going to happen. So there is a new care concept. There's a caretake company in the Netherlands. And what they do is, for example, for my parents, they could offer products for diapers or beds because they need support. They could offer household care, medical care. But right now, there is a nurse who is going to do an assessment. It takes 2 weeks to get an appointment. And then she will fax, email companies, and those services will be supplied. They do 130 million revenue, but 30 million is wasted because of this bureaucracy and inefficient planning. So what we said, there are already problems solved elsewhere. So we take last mile technology, we put that in that specific case. So now a nurse can say, hey, these are the type of services that I need to have, the products, etc. But what happened is that the CEO said, I'm going to put this into a separate venture because the problems will not be solved in this specific context, because they're so used to the system. No, we have to obey the law and the care rules, etc., etc. But it's supplying demand or matching supply and demand is a complete different value and a complete different ballgame. So I would always say that you have to take it outside the organization
and bring it back maybe once it starts to scale.
And then there are actually two reasons. One is that you would like to create the solution and a prototype and not being bothered by the old system and negative people or people with a different mindset. But what we learned also is that not many people in the board or in management dare to take such a decision in order to take that forward, because it's new, it's never done before, it's disruptive, and it could cost you your career, right? So outside the organization.
There was also, I'm looking to the questions from the audience. There is a question about new trends, where to search for them. Looking to emerging markets like the energy sector, like heating households. So where do you see? You see any like new trend where you would advise?
So for example, it's like what I like to see is when you look at business models, then the value is already created and visible, right? So therefore, we always look at business models. But you need to look at the West and the East and understand the context where that business model lives, right? So the context in Asia is different from the context in the US than in Europe, and that's big time learning. So I give you an example. Like many years ago, I was working with Steve Blank in a serial entrepreneur from the US who helped this business model thinking to grow. And then we were at a climate startup competition, and that was 8 years ago. And then 10 startups pitching their ideas, and they come up with these solar panels, etc. But that business model was already invented by Jigar Shah from Sun Edison, big company. So what he learned is that selling solar panels didn't make any sense because nobody wants to have solar panels because you need to invest in solar panels. What the job was for people is to get a lower energy bill, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is a complete mismatch in the business. So what he started to do, he started to sell investment promises for 6% on an investment or solar panels. So that was one customer segment. And to the other customer segment, he was promising the lower energy bill. So therefore, he went to the bank, said, hey, I already financed this. Can I start my operation? So what we learned is that 3 out of those 10 startups, they knew what was going on. And this was the way to solve the energy problem at that point in time through a business model design that was otherwise broken. And now it was there. And 7 didn't understand that. And that's exactly the knowledge that you're looking for to try and see different regions, understand what the context is of such business model, and then take your the best practice and see what that would look like for yourself.
Okay, thanks. A second question that I see from Piotr Novak: how to reflect the value chain during business model creation? Do you have your own method to do that? Is it only value proposition design, or work it through all the 9 elements?
No, I think it's a very good question. What you need to understand with business model design, you diverge and you converge, and it's a flow where you let information in and out, and it's sometimes difficult for people because they mostly would like to look at this specific. No, what we do is look at this and this. So in the value chain, you look at the value chain, try to understand what parties there are, what role they play. So you model the business model of each of those. Because then you understand the dynamic, understand like where value is created and so on. And then also, for example, when you look at the new concept, there was Kees Kruidhoff, who was supposed to be the new CEO of Unilever. But he said, I believe I would like to change the way the food chain is designed. So he said, isn't it stupid that we feed cows with grass? Then we need to kill them. And then we need to process it, etc. So he said, I'm going to work on plant-based models. So you see the value chain, the cow is out of the value chain, right? And this is a complete new model. And then when you design and understand what those value chain, what impact that has, it gives you also better understanding of what is the next value chain going to look like, and where can you as a company create value. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, we always talk about small or big successes, the bikes in Amsterdam, and then the change of maybe the model of IKEA with furnishment as a service. But can you also tell us some things about failures? I think that
like from your country in Belgium, where you are partly spending your time in your life, is that I had a conversation with Taft, and Taft is a shoe retail company, and the board said, we wanted to create a platform business model. So they started to create the platform, and at some point they thought, this is not us, this is not the game we would like to play. So they stopped the project. Salesforce was not happy, but they killed the contract, and they learned we're far better off in the model that we already were operating. So I think that's exciting. Another thing is when you look at swap feeds, I also have had a conversation with an e-bike company called Quick, with a QWIC. And he said, I don't believe in that model of swap feeds because it's a running around in a treadmill, because you need to grow in order to create your assets, but is the monthly subscription enough in order to carry on that maintenance, et cetera, And I think you have to find elements in your business model that make it truly profitable. So when you look at Everphone, they designed a second-hand market with refurbished that nobody knows how to really do that. And that's how they create the leverage. So yeah, you're right. Like there are also similar companies who tried it before with swap feeds, didn't work, and therefore still with such concept as swap feeds is the question: is that are they going to be there in the long run? And the same we have the last mile delivery right now. They pop up like gorillas, like all over the place, but it's not a profitable model at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all about.
I guess we have to accept that there will be many failures. We need to try. We need to reinvent ourselves. It doesn't mean that we need to change all the company by Monday morning, but maybe next week Monday we should start investigating in small new initiatives and ideas and see if they can fit in the company. Like you say with the shoe company, sometimes you think about something but it doesn't fit maybe in the culture of your company, or you don't feel well with that new proposal, and sometimes it can fail as well. We don't have the crystal ball, I guess. We have something fantastic, because that's what I learned in your presentation as well. I think innovation doesn't need to be always linked to technology, but it's true that technology and digital has enabled us to reinvent nearly any business in the world. You cannot imagine a business that you cannot reinvent thanks to digital and technology.
I remember that Michael Anseu, head of retail bank in Brussels for BNP Paribas, he said 6 years ago, every business will be digital.
Yeah.
We were really like, yeah, right. But it's really true because, yeah.
And you don't have the crystal ball yourself, but what do you see for the next coming years? Are there things that are coming to your mind that you say, like, we should look in that direction, or I can see some trends or some things coming up to us?
Yes. I see that when it comes to new concepts, it's either go big or go home. So if you look at new technology, and we are working with a big technology company, if you can't make it work with a prototype in the first 2 months and validate and test in the next 2 months, you can't play the game, because these developments go so fast. Also, when you look at this whole plant-based movement, Kees Kruithof also said when he worked at Unilever, they looked at the brand Alpro, who has this alternative milk products.
Yeah.
It only had 3% market share, so they said, we're not going to look at that. 1 year later, 8% market share. So there is this, as a result of this technology change, you right away are into an exponential growth curve. So in terms of soccer, you are an amateur soccer team, and the next year you play in the Champions League finals. Yeah. And that's something that technology is doing. So for example, you need to also prepare for scale. And that is something very different. And the other thing what I will see, or what you will see, is that digital models are very different from physical models that are digitalized. So you will see new concepts and new models that start to initiate from like the AI for the bank credit model that I showed you. Those will outcompete those traditional companies more and more. So I'm excited to see what kind of new digital models will pop up. And that will be the through line, and really this Champions League game, that is something that's really out there. So corporate companies are used to have that kind of scale, right? So this infrastructure on how to scale, that's more and more important.
So the scaling, the impact of scaling will be, or should be, quickly on the agenda of any initiative, startup or corporate. Be ready to scale, because it can go suddenly very fast.
And also for you as a small entrepreneur, try to figure out, do I need to build a platform, or am I going to operate in different platforms to be successful? Meaning, is Amazon a channel, yes or no? And that's also a very different mindset.
Yeah. But also, I think it's from what I hear from you about the how to innovate in corporates. I think there is room and space for startups also to connect themselves with corporates, because sometimes they are a small new idea and they can try to, how do you call it? It's corporate venturing, I think. But you can try to connect yourself with a a big IKEA and try with your small new idea, try to see how you cooperate together, and through that scale up your own idea as well. So I think that bridge between, and that's also something that an organization like Lab is trying to do. They do some nearly incubation of smaller startups, and then they try to link them with larger organizations and see how they can bridge. And I think it's a healthy model to try to.
For example, like the concept of Everphone is acquired or invested by Deutsche Telekom.
Yeah. Okay.
So they realize we can't offer these services ourselves, so we invest, and therefore they partner up. Everphone needs them to scale, and Deutsche Telekom needs them to add different services because they can't play that ball game. Yeah, it's a very good example.
No, but certainly lessons learned, I think, today is continue to use it, and I believe that it's a fantastic tool. I think a canvas remains something very basic but very interesting. Shake a bit the way you play with your canvas. Try to see how you can innovate through the business model. Try to see how you can step down from owning to servicing. Yeah. I think, fantastic learnings, and it's good to get it back clearly stated like you do. And I guess everybody, if you want to know more, you can always dive into the book of Patrick, because there are many examples of different business models in different industries. So you can get inspired, and you can start playing yourself with your own organization. So thanks a lot. I've gone through many questions that I had in mind, and some others, and thanks to the audience. I think we were inspired. I hope the audience will appreciate it, and that soon we will be able to not speak from Amsterdam and Brussels to Poznan, but we will be able to all travel to Poznan, sit in the LAB150, and reinvent some interesting new businesses.
Yeah, so this was a Champions League final between a Belgian team and a Dutch team playing in Poland, right? In Poznan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon. And I would say, in name of LAB150, thank you for the inspiration, Patrick. Thanks to the audience also to have been there for an hour. And look forward. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.